Well, welcome everyone to our customer-exclusive March webinar, Penetration Testing for Smarties. Why, when, and how to test. Before we jump in, just real quick, for those that haven't joined these with us, on the bottom, you're going to see a Q&A button, or with the comments, please, we welcome your questions all the time. So please use those. And then in addition, our upcoming customer webinars in May is going to be Good Fences, Make Good Neighbors, Managing Supply Chain Risk. And in September, we're really going to focus on testing your incident response capability. I hope that you'll join us for those. And always, you can go to our website under resources or on our YouTube page, and you can see recordings of previous webinars. With that, I'd like to introduce our new speaker for this session. It is my pleasure, if you haven't met him yet, to introduce you to Gary Braglia. He's our new VP of Services at OrbitalFire. And with that, Gary, why don't you take it away?
Well, thank you, Dana. Great to see, for those folks that I have met already, great to see you again. Thanks for joining. For those that I haven't, great to meet you. Just a little background on me, I've been in IT and cybersecurity for a little over 15 years. I've actually worked with Reg in some past lives over at Grey Castle. So I will be your guide here for the next 5 hours for this webinar. Just kidding. Going to keep this definitely under an hour. I got battling a little bit of a chest cold here, but I got my tea, I got my water, so I think we'll be good to go here. But first, before we dive in, a couple of quick poll questions. First, are you planning on doing a penetration test this year? So this, obviously, this webinar is a little, is focused on penetration testing. So I just want to get a little bit of an understanding what folks are doing. All right, see the answers coming in.
There are the results.
Okay, so some no's, some not sure, a couple of yeses. Looks good. And then I think we had another one. If yes, do you feel it was valuable? Well, this would be, if you've had one done in the past, did you feel it was of any value? The biggest thing that we're going to be pushing here today is really making sure, one of the major points we're going to be making is making sure that the tests that and all the cybersecurity services that you're having performed are valuable.
Okay, no results.
All right, so some yeses and some not sures. Makes sense. All right, I think that was the last one, right? Ready to jump in?
Yeah. One more here.
I do have one more.
Oh. Yep. Let's see. Sorry about that.
I think, Dana, we ended up combining. Yeah, I think we've ended up combining one. But yeah, we'll wrap up the last one here. So, any folks curious your exposure to pen testing, if you've had them done in the past? Quick question here. Okay. Interesting. About a 50-50 split. So that's good. That actually aligns pretty well with kind of the tone of this presentation, I would say. All right, so let's jump in. First, just want to start off a little bit of a paradoxical statement, I guess, here, just to set, like I said, to set the tone, but I think we're all smarties here, like we said, so I think we'll get it. When is slow actually fast? Kind of a weird statement, but sometimes slow is fast. Well, I can tell you when it isn't. It's not when, it's not when it's used to describe the car I was behind on the way into the office here in Troy today. It's not when I'm asking my kids to get ready for school in the morning. It's not when I'm starving at the restaurant waiting for my food. No, it isn't. But when is it? So we'll expand this a little bit. So the quote I want to leverage here is, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So this saying is used a lot in military environments, weapons training. I know I've heard it used by some martial arts instructors as well. The idea being to ensure precise, deliberate actions over rushed and sloppy ones. It's better to sacrifice a little bit of speed for an increase in precision than to be fast and make a bunch of unnecessary mistakes. Maybe sounding a little contradictory, especially in the world of small businesses. And personally, most of my adult life and actually all my favorite jobs have been spent working for small businesses. So I definitely get it. Moving quick is the name of the game, whether it's hiring, getting funding, development, just growing the business. But, and especially with cybersecurity, moving too quickly can be a real problem. You know, we have people coming to us all the time, potential customers and even some of our customers saying, I need a pen test. I really need a pen test. When we always sort of have to try and talk them off the ledge, slow them down, ask them some questions. You know, are you sure? Why do you need a pen test? What's the reason behind it? What else have you done in your security program? Number of other questions. I mean, jumping into a penetration test without having an idea or a prioritization of the risks and threats to your organization, without thinking of the goals and the scope and the value that you're trying to obtain, can be a monumental waste of time. And that is what we don't want any of our customers doing. So if you think about it, the point of this phrase really is that redoing all the mistakes from moving too fast, carelessly, and without precision could end up taking longer in the end. We want to prevent that. So we're going to get into the why, the how, the when of penetration testing. Let's start off first with a little bit of the what. Now, we know that there is zero consensus in cybersecurity on terminology and definitions. And so you sort of have this classic definition of a penetration test as a real world attack or a real world simulated attack on an organization using the tactics and techniques of modern day cyber criminals. In some ways, I would say that's one interpretation, but it can be so many things, from very small targeted exercise, looking at a few network assets over the course of a day, even a few hours, to a full-blown red team exercise, including 6, 8, 10 attack vectors and lasting an entire year. But for us, this is really the two that we focus on, the three things that we focus on really here. I'll put them all up here: strategic, recurring, and valuable. This is what we at OrbitalFire believe pen testing should be. Strategic, and they all sort of inform each other. They're kind of little subsets of each other here, these terms. Strategic meaning it should be part of your cybersecurity program, done at the right time. And we're going to be hitting on a lot of this throughout this presentation. But just knowing and understanding that a penetration test can be an extremely valuable exercise if performed in the right way, in the right at the right maturity level for your organization, with the proper planning and making sure that it is the best fit for you. Recurring, this is something that even I would say some of the more experienced pen testers that I've worked with in my past maybe sometimes don't communicate enough to customers, is that it is truly a snapshot in time exercise. This is what your organization looked like on that day, in some cases in those hours that we tested you. So I mean, a pen test that you do today is going to be very different than something that you do next week, next month, next year, certainly. And that's because of all the changes that are taking place, whether it's within your organization, within the threat landscape of cybersecurity, the compliance and regulatory requirements that are changing constantly, right? We're going to get into all that as well. The last point that we'll be stressing quite a bit is that it needs to be valuable for your organization. It has to be the right exercise for your organization. If you've had a test in the past and all they did was, own your firewall, did it even matter to your business? Did you understand what happened? Did you get the value out of it that you really needed? And we're going to be walking through some steps really to hopefully make sure that you're going to get the most value out of that. Of course, as our customers, we're always going to be there to partner with you and ensure that you're getting that value. All right, so we talked a little bit about what penetration is and certainly what it means to us here at OrbitalFire, but let's get into the whys. Why should you do it? Why do some organizations do it? Well, like I said, because you should, right? The first 2 points here are things that we make in a lot of our webinars and presentations and just communication in general to our clients, is that the two main reasons we're even doing cybersecurity at all are for defensibility and resiliency, sort of what we call the North Stars in cybersecurity. Defensibility, doing enough of the right things in the right order to positively impact your cybersecurity program. Then resilience, just building enough into the business so that when you, not if, when, right, you experience some adverse cybersecurity event, condition, you're able to minimize the loss, damage, penalties, the amount of disruption that your organization experiences. So you think about it, for defensibility, if you are an organization, for example, that's leveraging a web-based or several web-based applications externally facing to the public to provide your services, if you're in a highly regulated industry, if you're dealing with large amounts of what is generally considered to be sensitive information, protected information, you want to be able to show that you have done things to mitigate the potential risks of compromise. And that is really what we mean by defensibility and resiliency. And we'll be covering the timing aspects in sort of the when section of the webinar here today, but really in terms of when it makes sense for an organization to perform a pen test. But let's say you're ready to do it. You've gotten to a level of maturity in your security program, stars align, and you're ready to go. Well, maybe have you had some incidents that you've experienced in the past? You've made some remediations and you want to know whether or not they were effective. Or you've got some known vulnerabilities. You've done a pen test in the past. You've done some vulnerability scans and you've made some corrections based on the results. Well, this is a great way to test the resiliency of the controls that you've put in place now, right? And then one other point that I don't think maybe enough folks consider, customers and just organizations out there in general, is just kind of considering this idea of perception. And you'll hear me say perception a few times throughout the webinar today. And it's pretty simple and in a few different contexts, but really here we're thinking about it. If your organization is showing a commitment to improving your security posture by investing in activities such as penetration testing, and your customers are not, you're kind of winning, right? I mean, it's a huge boost to customer confidence and trust. So you can really establish a competitive advantage by performing an exercise like a pen test. So we say because you should, but then with an asterisk, unless maybe you shouldn't. So I mentioned this earlier, so many small business customers approach us saying they need a pen test performed. At least half the time, our ultimate response is, nah, you don't. I mean, do you have any other controls in place? Have you performed a risk assessment to get an understanding of and a prioritization of the real risks to your organization? Do you have policies, plans, procedures in place? Have you trained your staff on those policies and on best practices for cybersecurity in general? Do you perform social engineering testing? Do you perform vulnerability scanning regularly? Is there a culture of cybersecurity? If not, really probably not the best idea for you to do a pen test at that time. For small businesses, budgets are tight. I mean, everywhere budgets are tight, certainly when it comes to cybersecurity. But this is particularly true for small businesses, even those that have a pretty good understanding of cybersecurity. They have a limitation of what they can actually do, the resources they can leverage. And it's not like they can build those extensive cybersecurity programs that that larger companies employ. So for our customers, it's often times a kind of a juggling act of where to prioritize, right? I'll throw this up there as well. Many cases, there are better ways to spend those resources than in a pen test. And we'll talk through some of those things as well. It's really about planning. And like I said, so many of the, go back. So many of the conversations we have with our customers are focused on where to prioritize their efforts. And that comes from, you can't really do that until you have an understanding of the organization, of the industry you're in, the compliance requirements, for example, if any, what your security program looks like. And that's why we're here to help prioritize those. And it's different for every customer. Another reason why you are potentially going to perform a pen test, well, maybe it's not technically, excuse me. Like I said, battling a little bit of a chest cold here. maybe not technically that you have to, but maybe it's that everyone else is demanding that you do, right? So federal, state, regulatory bodies, your cyber insurance carriers, some other reasons why to do this, right? But regulatory compliance, I mean, finance, healthcare, government, e-commerce sectors, they have to meet specific rather regulatory requirements. So for instance, financial institutions have to think about PCI DSS if they're going to be handling credit cards, healthcare organizations, HIPAA requirements. Sometimes it's prescriptive, meaning they outline exactly, quote unquote, exactly what you need to do. There's not really much of a gray area, which is helpful because it's pretty clear in those cases what constitutes kind of a pass or fail, so to speak. Something like PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, compliance standard, not a law, industry standard and a requirement. At its core, really designed to protect cardholder data and ensure secure payment transactions. And generally speaking, applies to organizations that handle, process, store cardholder data. So think merchants, financial institutions, service providers. But the point we're talking about here, PCI DSS requires, among other things, regular testing of security systems with very specific parameters about where they want you to test, what they term the cardholder data environment, or CDE. So again, prescriptive because it's specific in terms of the scope. So kind of it differs from descriptive. So a little trickier with the descriptive types, where something like HIPAA, where the HIPAA security rule focused on standards for protecting ePHI and requires the implementation of a number of different safeguards, administrative, physical, technical, to secure ePHI. But there's no real specific method that's recommended. They state the quote is they want you to identify and protect against reasonably anticipated threats to the security or integrity of the information, right? Pretty vague. I mean, the framework does ask businesses to opt for a solution that considers the size, complexity, infrastructure, costs, but really doesn't include the specifics like the more prescriptive compliance requirements do. Cyber insurance. Many insurance companies are now starting to require network penetration testing as a condition of coverage. Why? Well, pen testing does provide evidence that your organization is taking those proactive steps to identify and address vulnerabilities in your network. So think defensibility, right? So by requiring pen tests, insurance companies are essentially saying that they're not going to cover the costs of an attack unless you can demonstrate that you've taken steps to mitigate those potential risks, right? That you've done your due diligence, your defensibility, and working on your resiliency. And then post-incident scrutiny, I mean, think about if something's already gone terribly wrong and you're now faced with a lot of questions coming at you from a lot of different places regarding an incident. Well, performing a pen test could help in this effort by adding to your defensibility to demonstrate your attempts and improvements at resiliency, right? So we're kind of tying all these terms together here. The last reason, well, you're vulnerable for a number of different reasons, right? Technology, sensitive information, perception, I'll put these back up there. Is your business, for example, centered around an internet-facing web application behind which sits all the crown jewels of the organization? Remember, internet-facing, that means it is not only exposed to the public, it's exposed to potentially attackers, anyone out there. Do you have multiple web applications exposed to the public? Well, more surface area means more potential avenues of compromise in some cases, right? Sensitive information, any business has hack-worthy resources. Even a one-person shop, there's data worth scoring for a cyber criminal. Sell that stuff on the dark web. From there, other criminals can take it and use them for identity theft. We're talking about things like customer records, employee records, bank account information, emails, passwords, payment card details, certainly. So no matter who you are, you have sensitive information that is valuable to somebody out there. And then the perception. So I want to go back to this point. In some cases, we've encountered customers that don't really realize that they can be leveraged as a means to an end and provide entry into those larger organizations. A lot of our customers have larger customers. They provide services to those customers, and vendors are often connected digitally to certain client systems, and this can enable a potential multi-company breach. And yeah, these criminals weren't planning to target you, but it's a nice little bonus, right? They get two companies for the work of one. Think about the Target breach. This is the example we always use. Everybody knows this one. Attackers got in to Target via a 40-something person HVAC provider, right? They used small company to get to the big one. All right, so we've talked about the why. Let's get into a little bit about how we want to be doing this. First step, critical step, defining the purpose. And I'll put all these up here as well. The objective. At the beginning of the pen test process, planning process, you need to define exactly why you are trying to get this done. What is the result you're looking for here? Is it for compliance? Is it for did your best customer insist that you do a pen test? Are you just concerned about cybersecurity? Maybe you were compromised in the past. And success, right? Sometimes, just a quick little point here. I mean, sometimes we've had customers that have used a pen test to sort of open eyes, to open the eyes of some folks in the organization or some other reasons, either to the good that's going on in the organization or the bad, right? We've had customers that have leveraged a pen test and the findings in particularly to be like, look, I told you we're potentially vulnerable. We need to do some other things around here. So in some cases, success almost looks like failure from a pen test result standpoint, right? So you want to really define the objective and what success looks like. Vendor, choosing the right vendor, absolutely critical. In my past life, part of my responsibility was assessing vendors, and it is a pretty, kind of a painstaking process. You have to look at a lot of different aspects of what those vendors are going to do for you, how many years experience, what types of organizations does that vendor typically work with? Are they small businesses? Are they larger, more enterprise businesses? And do they understand where you are in your security program? In some cases, pen testers love to do their job. It is a really fun job. They want to do as much as you're going to let them do. Too much can be much too much for small businesses in some cases, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we just talk through kind of choosing the right test. At the end of the day, pen testing is an expensive endeavor. So it is imperative that you clearly identify the objectives, what success looks like, and that you're picking the right vendor. So after you've defined your purpose, you want to think about the scope, right? At the end of the day, we always preach to our customers, there's 5 categories of assets that small businesses should be concerned about protecting. We're talking about these things right here. So money, intellectual property, regulated data, global admin credentials, and reputational assets. So global admin credentials being essentially the keys to the kingdom to access all the other valuable things that you have, the valuable data information that your organization has. These are the 5 things. No matter who you are, these are the crown jewels. No matter what business, what size, what industry, nothing else matters. So if your pen test isn't helping you understand the risks and potential exploitability of these 5 things, does it even matter? Will you even care? What's the value that you're getting out of that? And then last point around scope, in some cases, it's really not up to you. Like you mentioned earlier, if you're in a highly regulated industry where security is paramount, they're going to kind of tell you what will be in scope. So example I used earlier, PCI, right? They're going to let you know exactly how, with one of those more prescriptive compliance standards. Next, you want to make sure you're understanding the risks. And I want to kind of frame this by saying we don't expect you as our customers to understand your threats and the potential attackers that may be targeting your organization for whatever reason. That's our job. But we want to just show you a little bit behind the curtains for, just to show you what we do to determine the best course of action for you. What would be an effective and meaningful pen test for you, but we're not going to ask you to do this. So we'll put these up here. Establishing the first thing we want to be doing is really establishing the priorities from a risk assessment, because for assessing certain types of risks, pen tests can be really valuable. They can do things that nothing else can do in terms of helping us prioritize. But it's important not to exaggerate the importance of a pen test finding, right? There are likely bigger fish to fry. So we make sure that we stick to the program that we have in place. Just because we we were able to get to your bank account and we're just about to begin, wiring money. What is the actual risk is what we want to think about, right? We have some potentially exposed systems, certainly enemies out there, but we need to prioritize those threats because is it a risk? Of course it's a risk. Is it the biggest risk? Maybe not. What is the likelihood and what is the impact, right? We have to think about risks in terms of other parameters as well. We want to just stress that simply because it shows up in a penetration testing findings report, it doesn't mean we're going to necessarily jump on those findings and prioritize all of those. We're going to help you integrate those findings into your security program in a risk-based way. Because remember, there's two types of security. There's the reality of how secure you actually are. There's the how secure you may feel, particularly after seeing some scary results and findings of a pen test. So the firm was able to, clone your ID badges and scale the walls and pick the locks and walk out with a couple of laptops. The reality is that is never going to happen to you. Never going to happen. Now, I'm going to take a moment here for a brief disclaimer. Sometimes here at OrbitalFire, we're a little cavalier with our adverb usage. And for example, we may use a term like never in a non-literal manner. Thank you. Back to the webinar. Lastly, after we've defined our scope or defined our objective, we've looked at the scope, we've partnered with you to understand the risk or the threats, choosing the right test. Now this is, I'm going to put these all up here, probably going to be the first time some of you have heard these terms, probably too much detail, but just to illustrate again, the different types of tests that are out there. You do not need to know these terms. Certainly you don't need to memorize any of these. Probably overkill, a lot of these, maybe less relevant, less valuable for small businesses. And we're going to help you sort through these options and help you figure out what's the most valuable and meaningful test to do on an annual basis. And just again, this is some of the thought process that goes on behind the scenes here at OrbitalFire. And the more we know about your business, the risks, the requirements, we're going to make recommendations on different types of testing. And we're already doing this today for a lot of our customers. Some of our customers at the more mature end of the curve in terms of cybersecurity program maturity. We may have them perform a network test and then maybe a red team exercise, web application. Depending on what the program looks like, we may incorporate different types of tests because they all generate different types of results and outcomes. We take those outcomes and then they lead to different conclusions. We can help inform the next steps in your risk-based security program. So we just kind of use them as a way to inform the security program overall. All right, we talked about the why, the how. Let's get into a little bit of the when. Well, a kind of a classic example of when to do a pen test is anytime anything has changed. So whether it's the technology has changed, you've got some new systems in your infrastructure, you've upgraded your firewalls, anything has changed, good time to do another pen test if you've done one in the past. You are a small business now, or you were 2 years ago, maybe you've grown. You've rolled out some new web applications that you want to test the resiliency of the controls that you've put in place. Maybe the priorities have changed. Like we said, you've moved through the maturity of your cybersecurity program. You've done your risk assessments. You've prioritized. You've got your plans in place. You're training your people. Some other things. Time for a pen test. The priorities do change, right? So sometimes the business changes and the priorities change with it. Some cases, the rules change, right? Our CEO Reg recently gave a webinar on some of the updates to the regulatory and compliance requirements out there. These things are always changing. So maybe in the past you were not required to perform a pen test, and now you are. Maybe your customers are now requiring this of you. They want to see if they're going to be working with you that you kind of up your game in terms of cybersecurity and start performing pen tests. So sometimes things change outside of your control, like threats, right? Maybe a specific type of incident is showing up more and more that we haven't thought to test for in the past in your industry or just in maybe companies that are similar to you. Like we said, with growth, there may now be some new vulnerabilities. Maybe you've acquired a smaller company, you want to test their resilience. And those vulnerabilities are always coming out, right? The threats have changed. There's zero-day vulnerabilities that are coming out all the time. And you want to make sure that if you put some security controls in place around those, you want to make sure you want to test the resiliency of those as well. Certainly the point we want to make with how is that the timing is everything. It's important. Less important about, I guess, the cadence maybe is that you're doing it on a regular basis. The business is changing constantly. The threat landscapes are changing constantly. The requirements are changing constantly. You want to make sure you're doing this on a regular basis. Annually is typically what we recommend for most of our small business customers. But at the end of the day, it's going to be what is right for your business, where you are in your security program, all the things that we talked about, how they line up, and whether or not it is the right time and the right service for you to perform. That leads us to a couple of final thoughts. We call this penetration testing for Smarties because we want to make sure that we are being Smarties. There's another quote that I love, is that there's no right way to do the wrong thing. You could have spent days and weeks planning exhaustively for your pen test, painstakingly establishing what's in scope, evaluating threats to your business, parsing through dozens of different vendors. Guess what? If it wasn't the right thing for your business, it's the wrong thing, and you've wasted all that time. So at the end of the day, first and foremost, we want to stress it is all about you, about your business, your security program. It's not, your security program is not necessarily going to look like that of your peers. So you want to make sure that the driving force behind all of this is what is the best thing for your organization, your security program, your requirements, all of the things that we spoke of. Planning, defining the goals, establishing the scope based on the needs of your organization. And once you've done that, prioritizing, right? Again, at the end of the day, may not be the right thing or the right time to perform the service. If you have decided that it is the right time, choose wisely. Be very choosy, be very picky about the vendor and the type of tests. Remember, slow down. Slow can be fast sometimes, particularly in cybersecurity. Something we're always preaching around here at OrbitalFire is to do the absolute minimum, the minimum necessary to protect your business mission, but no less than that, right? The two North Stars, resiliency, defensibility, making sure you have done a track record, so to speak, for doing all the right things or the correct things in the right order, and then testing if they're actually working, the resiliency of those controls that you've put in place. And with that, we want to make sure that we certainly understand that we can, that you certainly understand that we can help you with all this. And again, speaking through a little bit of kind of how the sausage is made in terms of understanding the threat landscapes and all the different types of testing out there, not something that we want any folks out there trying to memorize, trying to do themselves. That is quite literally what we want to be helping you with and partnering with you on. But just understand that we are certainly available to speak and discuss any of these points that we've made at length, and happy to do so. So with that, Dana, I'll see if there's any questions.
Gary, thank you so much. Yeah, we do have a couple of questions. The first one that we received is, does a vulnerability assessment count as a penetration test?
Classic. This kind of goes back to the point of the terminology and the sort of lack of consensus in terminology in our industry. They are very different things. Similar, they're related, but different. I mean, vulnerability assessment is looking at, is an enumerated look at all your technical assets and going to report out on every single one of the vulnerabilities that are found and given to you. A pen test is not that, right? We're going to be targeting specific assets. The end goal of a pen test is going to be to see if we can exploit the vulnerabilities that are found and compromise systems and go after the assets. Classic example is checking the doors and windows. For a vulnerability assessment is more of seeing if anything is there, seeing if it's open. If it is, just reporting that it's open. And pen test is going through the door and going after those assets. So they're related, they're similar, and sometimes they're done together, but they are different services. So it's definitely something that we should understand the differences of.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
And the other question that we received is, what is the difference between a red team exercise and a penetration test?
Okay, yeah, I did use both those terms. So pen test typically is done on a smaller scale, smaller in terms of scope, smaller in terms of the types of activities performed, and smaller in terms of costs, more targeted, specifically looking at a couple of network assets, specifically looking at web applications, for example. And in a lot of times it's done in coordination with the recipient, so with the customer. We'll be working with them to maybe even do some whitelisting when needed, learning about the organization so that we can get the most value out of the short time that we have to perform that activity. Red team is sort of the other end of the spectrum. Typically it's at its purest form, I guess I could say, is just sort of a full blown attack on your organization using half a dozen, 8, 10 different attack vectors over a much longer period of time, with very little coordination with the organization, doing a lot of information gathering and seeing what kind of information that can be obtained without help from the organization, in an attempt to really make that as realistic an exercise as possible. So they're similar to kind of the last question. They are related, but they are different exercises for sure.
Thank you. And I think that's all the questions that we have today. So Gary, thank you so much.
You are
Everyone, we
welcome.
will send this out, the recording, so you can, watch it again, share it with others in your organization. And for sure, I know, Gary, you have a slide with your contact information. I believe,
do.
Please, if you have any additional questions at all as you think about what we talked about today, just let us know. And it's support at OrbitalFire.com.
It sure is.
I say that's the French way of typing. But thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yep. Thank you.